My name is Vivian Ashworth. I am 31 years old, and the Sunday I finally left, I had been packing the car in my mind for 8 months. My actual hands did it in 11 minutes. I want to start there, with the 11 minutes, because I think that is the part people misunderstand when they hear a story like this. They assume the leaving was the hard part. They assume there was a scene, a confrontation, a final dramatic exchange that forced the decision. There was none of that. There was a man crouching down to speak to my 7-year-old daughter at eye level, in the voice adults use when they want to sound kind, and saying 4 words that I will not forget for the rest of my life. There was my daughter's face turning toward mine with a question in her eyes that no child should have to carry. There was my hand finding hers. And then there were 11 minutes and a car and a highway and a silence that felt, for the first time in 4 years, entirely safe. That is where this story begins. But to understand what those 11 minutes meant, you have to know what the 4 years before them looked like. I married young. Not dangerously young, not foolishly young, but young enough that when my husband Marcus, I will call him that here because it is not his real name, and I am not telling his story. When Marcus and I separated 3 years into our marriage, I was 28 years old with a daughter, who had just turned 4, and a son who was 2, and I was starting over in a way that felt, at the time, like falling off a building and discovering midair that you are closer to the ground than you thought. My sister, Claudine, lived 11 miles away. She had been married to Derek for 6 years by then, and they had a large house in the suburbs with a finished basement and a backyard with a swing set, and Claudine had offered, in those early months, when I was managing a new apartment and a custody schedule and the particular exhaustion of being the only adult in a home every other week, to have us over on Sundays. Her children and mine were close in age. The cousins loved each other. I said yes, gratefully, and for a while the Sunday dinners were the thing that held the week together. I need to tell you about Derek carefully because the truth about Derek is not simple, and I think simple truths are usually wrong about people. Derek was not a monster.
I want to be clear about that.
He was a man who had married a woman he admired enormously and who had never quite resolved, in the deep private accounting that people carry around without examining, how he felt about her younger sister. Claudine was the capable one in our family, steady, organized, professionally successful, the kind of person who makes competence look effortless. And I had spent most of my adult life being something adjacent to her, close enough to cast a shadow without occupying the same light. I think Derek had absorbed the family's version of me long before he had the chance to form his own opinion. I think the version he absorbed was, Vivian is the difficult one. Vivian is the one who makes things complicated. And I think, without ever really deciding to, he had spent 4 years confirming that version to himself in small ways, building a private case out of selected evidence, because it made him feel more securely on the right side of the family equation. That is not cruelty in the calculated sense. That is insecurity finding a direction. And I spent 4 years trying to be patient with it and forgiving of it and understanding of it, right up until the moment it aimed itself at my children. The comments had been building for years, laid down one at a time the way sediment builds, each one light enough individually that you could dismiss it, but which together formed something you could not see through. The first summer, Derek had mentioned at a barbecue that it was impressive how I was managing. The word managing said in the particular tone that makes managing sound like barely surviving. The following Christmas, when I mentioned I was considering going back to school for my design certification, he had nodded slowly and said, "That's a good idea for you. Something achievable." I smiled and changed the subject and drove home that night with the windows down in December and my hands tight on the wheel. There were others. Small ones, steady ones. Claudine sometimes caught them and gave me a look that said she had noticed. But the look never became words, and the words never became a conversation, and so the comments continued, one season after another, quiet and consistent as rainfall. I kept showing up because I loved my sister. I kept showing up because my children adored their cousins, because those Sunday afternoons were full of something genuine and warm that existed independently of Derek, because I told myself I believed, that the situation would find its own resolution if I was patient enough and careful enough and small enough not to give him additional material. I was performing a version of myself in that house. A quieter, less opinionated, more agreeable version. One who did not react to things, who did not assert things, who did not give anyone a reason to confirm the narrative. I was 30 years old, and I was editing myself weekly for a man who had decided who I was before he knew me. And I had told myself this was managing the situation. What I had not told myself, what I could not see clearly until a Sunday afternoon in November, was that there is no managing a situation like that. There is only continuing to participate in it or stopping. That Sunday began the way most of them did. I had driven over at noon with Lily in the back seat, who was 7 by then, and going through a phase of asking complicated questions about everything, and Owen, who was 5, and had recently become devoted to a stuffed elephant named Gerald that went everywhere with him. Gerald was in Owen's lap. Lily had her library book. The drive took 22 minutes, and I remember exactly because Owen asked at the 20-minute mark, "Are we almost there?" And I said 2 more minutes and thought, not for the first time, that I should find a way to reduce how often we made that drive. Claudine met us at the door. She hugged the kids first, which she always did, and then hugged me, and the afternoon went the way those afternoons went. The children disappeared into the backyard almost immediately, the cousins shrieking with some game that had been invented on the spot and had elaborate rules that changed every few minutes. I helped Claudine in the kitchen. We talk the way sisters talk when they are close but not completely honest with each other, around the real things, through the medium of smaller things, close enough to connection that you could mistake it for the real version. Derek was in the living room for most of it. He came through the kitchen once, took a beer from the refrigerator, said something to Claudine about the game on television, and went back. He and I exchanged the particular civility we had developed over 4 years, friendly in a way that required effort from both of us, and acknowledged nothing. It was 4:17 in the afternoon when I brought the children inside to wash their hands before dinner. Derek was in the living room. The television was on, but the sound was low. Lily and Owen came tumbling in from the back door behind me, still mid-argument about whatever the game had been, and I was reaching for the light switch in the hallway when I heard Derek say, from the sofa, in a voice that was pitched just right, not lowered to a whisper, not raised to be overheard, just conversational, the way you speak to children when you want to sound like a reasonable adult. "Hey, you two. Your mom's always been the unstable one in the family. Just so you know." He said it with a small laugh at the end. The kind of laugh that frames something as a joke that is not quite a joke, that gives the speaker room to retreat if necessary. I was 4 steps away. I went completely still. Lily stopped moving. She turned and looked at me with her library book pressed against her chest, and the look on her face was the one she got when she was trying to understand something she had not been given enough information to understand. Owen kept walking. He was 5. He had not fully parsed the sentence. He went to look for Gerald on the couch. I stood in the hallway for 3 seconds. Then I looked at Lily. I said, very quietly, "Come here, love." She came to me. I took her hand. I walked them both to the bathroom to wash their hands, and I stood in the doorway of that bathroom for 2 minutes looking at the tiles on the floor while the water ran, and something shifted in me that had been waiting to shift for 4 years. Not an explosion. Not a wave. A door, very quietly, closing. The 38 minutes between that moment and getting in the car were the quietest I have ever moved through a family situation. I did not find Derek. I did not find Claudine. I went to the kitchen, where Claudine was draining pasta, and I said, in a voice I kept completely level, "I need to take the kids home." "Owen's tired." Owen was not tired. Owen was in the living room explaining Gerald's medical history to one of the cousins. Claudine looked at me with a flicker of something, uncertainty, or the beginning of an instinct, and said, "Are you sure? We're nearly ready." I said, "I know."
I'm sorry.
"He just needs his own bed." She looked at me one more second. Then she nodded. I collected the children's things from the back hallway. Gerald, Lily's book, the extra sweatshirt I always brought for Owen because he ran cold. I put them in the tote bag I kept in the car. I helped Owen find his shoes, which were behind the umbrella stand. I said goodbye to the cousins, who protested mildly. I said goodbye to Claudine at the door, and she hugged me, and I let her, and I did not say what I was thinking. I did not say goodbye to Derek. I buckled Owen in first. He was already asking about Gerald's dinner arrangements for the evening. I told him Gerald could have crackers. I buckled Lily in second. She was quiet in the way that 7-year-olds are quiet when they are processing something they have not yet found the words for. I closed the door. I walked around to the driver's side. I got in. I put the key in the ignition. I did not cry. I did not sit in the driveway. I did not text Claudine from the end of the street. I put the car in reverse, backed out of the driveway at a normal speed, turned onto the road, and drove. By the time I merged onto the highway, Owen had fallen asleep. Lily was watching the dark fields going past her window. The first voicemail arrived at 4:59. Claudine's voice, uncertain and careful, saying, "Hey, just checking you got home okay. Call me." I watched it appear on the screen mounted on my dashboard, and I let it pass the way you let a green light pass when you are not the one it is for. I drove 47 miles before I pulled off at a rest stop, not because I needed to, but because I wanted to sit for a moment in the stillness of having done something I could not undo. Owen was still asleep. Lily was looking at me. "Mom," she said. "Yeah, love." "What Uncle Derek said." She stopped. Started again. "Is it true?" I turned around to look at her properly. I said, "No, it is not true. And it was not okay for him to say it to you. That's why we left." She thought about this. She nodded once, the way she nodded when she had filed something. Then she went back to looking out the window. I turned back to face the road. I sat there for 4 more minutes with the engine idling and the rest stop lights casting long orange shapes across the asphalt, and I thought about the version of myself that had been showing up at that house every Sunday for 4 years, folded small, performing agreeable, and I thought about Lily's face in that hallway, and I thought about Owen, who was too young to have parsed the sentence but who would not always be too young, and who would go back to that house week after week and would hear versions of that sentence, softened or not, until it became part of how he understood the world. Not while I was his mother. Not while I had any say in it. I want to tell you about the days after because I think people imagine that doing the right thing produces immediate clarity and relief, and sometimes it does, and sometimes it produces something more complicated that you have to sit with before it becomes clarity. The night I drove home, I bathed the kids and put them to bed, and then I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and my phone, and I looked at the voicemail count, which was at 3 by then, and I thought about what I was going to say to my sister. I had a colleague named Priya who worked 2 desks over from me and who was, by most measures, the most practical person I had ever met, the kind of woman who assessed situations without sentiment, not because she lacked feeling but because she had learned, somewhere along the way, that sentiment clouds the first decision and is better applied to the second one. I had told her, in fragments, over the previous 8 months, about the Sunday dinners and Derek's comments and my own continued attendance at both. She had listened without editorializing, which I appreciated, and twice she had said simply, "You know you don't have to keep going." I texted her that night. It was 9:47. I wrote, "Left Claudine's early. Not going back." She replied in 4 minutes. "Good. How are the kids?" I wrote, "Owen's asleep. Lily's okay." She asked me if it was true. A pause. Then, "What did you tell her?" I wrote, "The truth." Another pause. Then, "That's all you can do. Get some sleep." I did not get much sleep. What I turned over, in the bedroom dark at 2:16 in the morning with Owen's baby monitor casting a faint green light on the ceiling, was not whether I had done the right thing. I was settled about that with a completeness that surprised me. What I turned over was Claudine, my sister, who had given me those Sundays, who had seen Derek's comments and had not stopped them, who had hugged me at the door and let me leave without asking the real question. I thought about how much I loved her and how much that love had cost me. I thought about the particular accounting of family relationships, the way you run a deficit for years because the relationship seems more valuable than the cost, and the way that assessment can be correct for a long time, and then one afternoon with a child's face asking a question she should not have to ask, simply stop being correct. A family will tell you blood is thicker than water until the day blood asks you to let someone diminish your children and call it keeping the peace. I thought about that for a long time. I let myself be sad about it. Then I let the sadness sit without amplifying it, which was the thing Dr. Renata Solis had been helping me practice for the past 6 months, sitting with difficult feelings without performing them, without dramatizing them, without rushing past them toward a resolution that felt cleaner than the actual situation deserved. I had started seeing Dr. Solis in April, not because of Derek specifically, but because of the general accumulation of the past 3 years, the divorce, the custody calendar, the particular loneliness of rebuilding a life while simultaneously maintaining the appearance of a life already built. She was a compact woman in her 50s who wore reading glasses on a chain around her neck and who had, in our third session, said something that I had written on the inside cover of the leather appointment book I kept by my bed. The goal is not to become someone who doesn't feel things. The goal is to become someone who doesn't let what she feels get decided for her by someone else. I read that at 2:37 in the morning. Then I put the book down and closed my eyes and did not sleep for another hour, but the hour was quiet, and quiet was enough. Claudine called 11 times in 4 days. Derek called twice. My mother called 3 times, which told me Claudine had told her, which was its own kind of information. There were text messages from an aunt I spoke to perhaps twice a year, which told me the information had moved further than I had anticipated. By Wednesday, the voicemail count was at 41. By Thursday evening, it was at 53. I listened to none of them. Not out of cruelty.
Not out of strategy.
I did not listen to them because I was not yet ready to have the conversation they were all building toward, and I had spent enough of my life having conversations before I was ready, because someone else's discomfort with my silence was treated as a more urgent priority than my own need for time. I was taking the time. They could wait. On Friday morning, 8 days after the Sunday at Claudine's, I sent my sister a single text message. I had written it 6 times before I sent it, not because I was unsure of what I wanted to say, but because I wanted to say it in a way that was honest without being cruel, clear without being cold, and final without being a door I had locked from the outside. What I sent was, "I love you, and I need time." Derek spoke to my children in a way that I won't be making space for anymore. "When I'm ready to talk, I will call you. Please don't ask others to reach out on your behalf." She read it at 8:14 in the morning. She did not reply for 6 hours. When she did, she wrote, "I understand."
I'm sorry.
I didn't know he said that to them. I believed her.
I want to be clear about that.
I believed that she did not know, in the specific sense that she had not been present for the 4 words. What I was less certain about was whether not knowing, in a broader sense, had been a choice she had been making for 4 years, a decision not to look too directly at certain things, not to ask certain questions, not to have certain conversations with her husband, because having them would have required her to do something with what she found. Not knowing in a marriage is sometimes the same as deciding not to know. I did not say this to Claudine. It was not the moment for it. But I held it the way you hold something you will need to put down carefully. The Sunday after, 2 weeks from the last one, I did not go to Claudine's. I took the children to the park instead, the one 3 blocks from our apartment with the good climbing structure and the bench that caught afternoon sun. Owen brought Gerald. Lily brought her library book and then did not open it because she was too busy climbing. I sat on the bench with a cup of coffee from the place on the corner, and I watched them for an hour and 14 minutes, and I thought, this is the Sunday. This is the one I have been choosing every week without fully knowing I was making a choice. The life I was building, I had been building longer than I knew. The design certification I had mentioned to Derek 2 Christmases ago, the one he had called something achievable in the tone that made achievable sound like a consolation prize, I had enrolled in the program 5 months ago. Thursday evenings and Saturday mornings at the community college on Ridgeline Avenue, and I was 3 months into it, and my instructor, a methodical woman named Professor Hargrove, who did not give praise easily, had handed back my last project with a note that said, "You have a real sense of spatial logic. This is harder to teach than people think." I had folded that note and put it in the cedar box where I kept the children's first drawings and my grandmother's pearl earrings and the small handwritten ledger from the kitchen drawer where I tracked the household budget. The things that were proof of a life I had actually built, not just survived. It belonged there. It was the same category. Priya and I had lunch on the Thursday after the Sunday in question at the sandwich place 2 blocks from the office, and she asked me how I was doing with the whole thing, and I told her, truthfully, that I was doing better than I expected and worse than I hoped, which she said was the accurate description of most of the important things in life. "What are you going to do about Claudine?" she asked. "I'm going to wait until I'm not sad and not angry," I said. "And then I'm going to have a real conversation."
Priya looked at me.
"That could take a while." "I know," I said. "I'm okay with that." She nodded. She took a bite of her sandwich. She said, "For what it's worth, you seem different." Different how?
She thought about it.
Like you stopped bracing. I thought about that for a long time afterward. Like I stopped bracing. I had been bracing for 4 years. Walking into that house every Sunday with my shoulders already up, already pre-managing, already running the calculations of how to be small enough not to give Derek material, agreeable enough not to give Claudine a reason to feel caught in the middle, present enough for my children without being loud enough to disrupt the surface. That is an enormous amount of maintenance. That is the kind of maintenance that empties you so gradually you don't notice until you stop and realize you have been running on nearly nothing for a very long time. The Sunday after the park, I took the children to a farmer's market instead, then a library, then ice cream. Owen declared it the best Sunday. Lily agreed with the solemnity she brought to important assessments. I filed that away too, into the ledger of things that were evidence of a life worth choosing. Claudine and I spoke on the phone 6 weeks after the Sunday at her house. By then the voicemails had stopped. She had honored the request I made in the text, which told me something important about her, that underneath the months of not quite looking directly, there was a woman who could hear a boundary and respect it. That mattered to me. The conversation was 40 minutes long and was one of the hardest I have had with someone I love. She cried twice. I did not. Not because I didn't have reason to, but because I had already done the crying earlier, in the private hours, in the right order, and I had arrived at the conversation from a different position. I told her what 4 years had looked like from where I was standing. I told her about the Christmas comment, and the barbecue comment, and the dozen small others. She listened to all of it. She did not defend Derek, which I had been prepared for and grateful not to receive. She said at one point, "I think I knew more than I let myself know." I said, "I think that's probably true." We left it there, in the way you leave something in a place you can both see it without deciding yet what to do with it. I did not go back to Sunday dinners.
I want to be clear about that.
The conversation was not a resumption of the old arrangement. It was the beginning of a different one with different terms, ones I had a hand in setting, ones that included my children's presence in any space where Derek would be only when I had decided I trusted the safety of that space. That was not a punishment. That was a parameter. Those are different things, even when they feel similar from the outside. 6 of the people who left voicemails never received a call back. That too was a parameter, not a punishment. When the people who love you allow someone to speak to your children in a way that causes harm, and their response is to contact you through intermediaries rather than to account for what happened, that response tells you what the relationship has capacity for. Not everyone who means well has the tools to do well. That is sad, and it is true, and I have made my peace with both halves of it. There are things I know now that I did not know clearly enough before that Sunday. Some people only know how to love what they can control. Derek did not love me. He barely knew me. But he had needed a version of me that fit a story he was telling about his marriage, his family, his position in it, and when the real version of me kept failing to match the story, the simplest solution was to make the real version smaller and less credible. That is not unusual. That is ordinary human insecurity finding its direction. What is unusual is recognizing it clearly enough and early enough to stop funding it with your presence. Real family does not test whether you can survive without them. Claudine is my sister, and I love her, and our relationship is in the careful early stages of becoming something more honest, which is harder than the old version and also better. That is the bargain. The thing that costs more is usually also the thing that lasts. My children will grow up in a house where the answer to someone speaking about them that way is, "We leave." Not in anger, not in performance. Just in the quiet certainty that our time is worth more than that, and so are we. Lily already knows this. I saw her file it the night I told her it was not true, and it was not okay. I saw her put it somewhere inside herself that she will carry for a long time. That is the only aphorism I needed to give her. The rest she will find. If someone needs you to be smaller so that they can feel larger, that is not a problem you can solve by continuing to shrink. You can only solve it by leaving them enough room to discover that their size was never actually dependent on yours. Family, without respect, becomes entitlement, and entitlement grows teeth the moment you build something it cannot reach. The last thing I want to say is this. The 11 minutes it took me to collect my children's things and get them to the car, those 11 minutes were not impulsive. They were the result of 4 years of watching and processing and forgiving and absorbing and waiting and hoping. The leaving looked sudden from the outside because the preparation was invisible. That is how real departures work. Not a dramatic exit. Just a person who has finally done the arithmetic and found that the numbers no longer add up to something she is willing to call acceptable. The cost of keeping the peace in a house, where peace means your children learning that you are the unstable one, is not a cost I will pay. Not for any version of belonging. And if you have ever sat in a parking lot or a driveway or a rest stop on a highway in the dark, with children asleep in the back seat, and asked yourself whether you made the right call, I want to tell you something. Not as advice. Just as one woman who has been in that parking lot to another. The fact that you are asking the question means you already know the answer. The leaving was not the hard part. The hard part was everything before it. You already did the hard part. The rest is just driving.